So yes, as Kathy said, my name's Lucy. I'm the director at the Cairns and Far North Environment Centre, and I have been on a very steep learning curve in the last year and a half. And what I'm going to present to you today is the understanding that I've developed of the challenges in the intersection between biodiversity and renewable energy. And I'll just share my screen because I've got little prompts here. Now, can everyone see my screen there? Just give me a thumbs up. Great. I did a little illustration of what I think we could have, but we'll see. So I guess I also want to start by acknowledging that we are all on the lands of First Nations people, wherever we are. I'm here on Gimoy, Wallaburra, Yidinji and Yirrakanji country. And, you know, just recognising that at the centre of a lot of this conversation is justice, and that's justice for the environment, but it's also justice for people. And yeah, there's a lot of First Nations justice that's intertwined in this conversation and going alongside the work that we're doing to get justice for nature. And those things are inseparable, and that we all have a role to play in that work. So I'm going to go through. I find one of the best ways to talk about this issue is like looking at the big picture and looking at what is the thing that we're trying to solve, and then getting back down into the nitty-gritty. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move through this presentation, give you a couple of actions that you can get involved with, and then go to questions. And so I really encourage you, if you have questions, to write them down as we go, and so you can come back to them at the end, because I won't stop during the presentation, but I'm really keen to hear what everyone's questions are and do my best to answer them. So I think it's really important, like Crystal said when we were doing in our introductions, to recognize what is the issue that renewable energy is trying to solve, and like how do we get to needing a transition. So, you know, we are seeing a big push to renewable energy because we need to reduce global climate damaging emissions, and that one of the biggest sources of climate damaging emissions that we have is energy production, and particularly fossil fuel energy production, and that we are also trying to limit the damage to biodiversity by limiting the global temperature rise. And also that, you know, climate change, and that's like driven by fossil fuel energy, has a real impact to human life. And people are losing their lives all over the world because of climate change. And there are some, you know, potential issues around in like regional industries and you know, solving some of the like lack of employment in regional areas. So there are things that the renewable energy industry has to offer, and we know that there's a reason that we're here today there, and for a long time our movement has campaigned for a transition to renewable energy. But there are also perverse outcomes that can occur, and that is what we're seeing, and that I think is true for any development. And again, a lot of us have been fighting the impacts of poorly planned development, and those are loss of vegetation, impacts to threatened species, disrupted ecosystems, disrupted flow systems in our waterways, and also overall net loss, which I'll explain a little bit more. But one of the things that we've seen with all kinds of development, including energy development in the past, is a really perverse offsetting scheme where you can say, I'm going to clear this bit of forest, but I will protect this bit of forest in perpetuity because I've cleared this. So this will never be chopped down. But what you've got there overall is a loss of vegetation in the grand scheme of things. So we have this like legislative process that permits clearing of vegetation and overall loss of biodiversity. So what we're seeing, our historical approach to development is allowing what we call net loss, that while we might be protecting this bit of forest over here, we're still allowing for clearing to happen on an ongoing basis. And so that's a really big issue that we're facing, not just with energy development, but urban development, all kinds of development, is this permitting of clearing. That's very explicit, but is also like sort of poised as this like great thing that developers are doing, which is a really, really hard thing to help people understand is a problem, particularly in government. What does it look like? So I think, thanks to Stephen for these amazing images. Well, they're very amazing images of really depressing stuff. But I think it's really important to, I always say to people, you can never solve a problem if you have a conceptual understanding of what it is. And so it is really important to ground ourselves in, this is what poorly planned renewable energy development looks like. This is Caban Wind Farm, which has just gone ahead up on the Atherton Tablelands. And this was the development that really raised the alarm bells for people in far north Queensland. Now, if you have a look at this image, for example, these are cars, these are vehicles here. This is a big truck. This is a big semi-road train. You think about how big that road train is, and then how big this cleared area is. And this is just a set down area, you know, or well, we have, I think that might actually be a bit different, but you have these big areas cleared in what is a very vegetated landscape. If you look at what that landscape looks like, that is not what people imagine are the locations for our new energy industry. So I think when people say, why is this an issue? I think, you know, it's really important to have these images like Stephen has taken the time to go and get, so that we can really center ourselves in what we are losing. So now I'm going to talk you through a little bit of a complicated slide. And I developed this bit after doing a lot of research around both the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, and the really global siloing of these issues, which I'll talk to a bit more after this slide as well. But first, I wanted to really center us in what is the issues, or what are the issues that we're actually trying to tackle here. So globally, we have two major crises on our hands when it comes to the environment and our ability to live on Earth. And that's climate damaging emissions, or what people might call the climate crisis, or biodiversity loss, which people call the biodiversity crisis. In these big systems, we're seeing from our climate damaging emissions, health and livability impacts. We're seeing climate events like fires, heats and floods really impacting our ability to be okay. With biodiversity loss, we're seeing reduced sequestration. And for those who might not know, sequestration is the ability of nature to remove carbon from our atmosphere. And so that can be in the ocean, in forests, in mud, in our mangroves. We're also seeing ongoing species extinction and the decline of our biodiversity. And both of these things are increasing our temperatures. So the inability to remove carbon from our atmosphere through forests and through the ocean and through those natural processes, as well as, you know, the increased output of carbon through the climate damaging emissions, are both increasing temperatures. And both the biodiversity loss, having, you know, biodiversity being having the amount of stuff we have in nature. I try to keep it pretty simple in these explanations, but the less stuff we have in nature, the less complex those systems are, the less they're able to perform what we call ecosystem services. And they're the services that nature provides us to be able to live on this planet that we can't easily replace with human solutions. So a really good example is mangroves, who, you know, sequester carbon, protect us from coastal inundation and coastal hazards, provide water quality. If we get rid of those mangrove ecosystems, our ability to do all of those things with human-made solutions is seriously inadequate. And so that's what an ecosystem service is. So we're seeing a lot of, and these have, I always get confused with negative and positive, because I always think a negative test should be a good, you know, a good thing. But anyway, these have positive feedback loops, which means, you know, as they go around, they are making each other worse. And so there's two key ways that our advocacy movement and researchers and society broadly have been trying to solve these issues. When we talk about climate damaging emissions, our primary way of solving that issue has been trying to reduce the amount of emissions we're pumping into the atmosphere. And when we talk about biodiversity loss, we're talking about conserving our biodiversity. And the ways that we're doing that is through species conservation and recovery of threatened species, and through protecting essential habitat. So making sure that the habitat that those species rely on isn't continuing to be destroyed or lost. On the emission side, it's transitioning away from fossil fuels and, that rapid development of renewable energy. And so what we know is that the conservation of biodiversity is essential to reducing our climate impacts, because our biodiversity provides ecosystem services and it sequesters carbon from the atmosphere, and it provides a really important role in, having a livable planet. But then emissions reduction are also essential for conserving biodiversity, because if we keep emitting as much carbon as we can, the ability of our biodiversity to survive in a warming world is limited. So then the next layer to that is we know that renewable energy development is increasing biodiversity loss, which means we're decreasing our ability to take carbon out of the atmosphere and have ecosystem services protecting us from climate impacts. And we're also seeing biodiversity loss increasing those climate impacts. And so that's where that really positive feedback loop is happening. And so you can see when you really put these two things next to each other that you can't actually solve one without solving the other. And these things cannot be addressed in isolation of each other. And one of the reasons why we have the problem that we're all talking about today is at a government level and an international level, these things have been dealt with in silos. Now, most of us have probably heard of the International Panel for Climate Change, the IPCC, and the work that they do to report on our climate. Not as many people have heard of IPBES, which is the Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is the equivalent of IPCC, but they deal with biodiversity and ecosystem services. Now, until last year, these two international bodies had never worked together. They had never had a workshop together. They'd never collaborated. They had not talked about these two big global issues that they were trying to solve. And last year, they had a workshop on tackling biodiversity and climate crises together and their combined social impacts. And I think, one of the things that is horrifying and reassuring is that one of the reasons we're here is because we have been trying to deal with those two big problems separately. One of the encouraging things is now that's changing. And I think I really like the quote from the report, and I've put the link down there, which is a terrible link, but if you Google the title that's on this slide, you'll find the report I'm looking at. But I think what it says here is solving some of the strong and apparently unavoidable trade-offs between climate and biodiversity will entail a profound collective shift of individual and shared values concerning nature, such as moving away from the conception of economic progress based solely on GDP growth to one that balances human development with multiple values of nature for a good quality of life while not overshooting both physical and social limits. I wanted to take the time to read that out because I think it really fundamentally gets to the issue of we cannot approach this energy industry in the way that we have approached our previous energy industry, and we cannot approach this development in the way that we have been approaching development in our country. And that really talks to the Sustainable Development Goals. It talks to the triple bottom line of sustainability, and it really talks about the worldview in which we approach renewing this energy industry. I have a sustainability degree, so I spent a lot of time talking about wicked problems. But for those of you who haven't come across the idea of a wicked problem before, I've just wanted to take the time to talk about it because I think this dives deeper into that. And I put the quote from Albert Einstein there because I think this is what we're really talking about, is we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we use to create them. So the problem we have created has been created by how we've done this energy industry. Our fossil fuel industry is not just the coal-fired power stations or you know, the gas-fired power stations. It's also the mining that's associated with it. It's the rehabilitation of those mines. It's the centralized energy network that we have. It's how we focus on export markets maybe instead of domestic markets, and that pushes up energy prices. So it is a really wicked problem, and wicked problems have a number of features that you can see there on the screen. So they don't have enough information. You can never actually completely solve them. There's lots of different people involved. It costs a lot of money and it's expensive. It's difficult to define what the issue is. There's a lot of social complexity involved, and particularly around justice and equity. The issues are interconnected, such as biodiversity and climate change. We are probably going to cause more problems while we try to solve them. And we can't test these, like if we are actually going to innovate how we solve this issue, we're going to have to do new stuff that we haven't tested before, and it's going to have to be multi-scaled. So we can't just have a state approach to solving our energy. We need to be talking about remote, regional, local solutions to this energy issue. And so when we talk about the intersection of natures and renewables, we're not just talking about where we develop certain projects. We're really talking about what does it actually mean to try and create a new solution to our energy needs that tackles both the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis in a way that's just for humans and nature. And I think why I really wanted to come into that is because you know, I think the conversation that we're having at the moment is not actually about reimagining how we supply our society with energy. It's just about how we replace one industry with another, and we can definitely do better than that. There are some really tangible steps that we can take, and one of the benefits of being a laggard on climate action is that people have done it before us, and people have started trying to solve this issue before us. And across Europe and America, they have already run into this problem long before we did. And so we can be looking to what other countries have done. Now, when we come back to, you know, like some of the practical steps, the IUCN have created guidelines for mitigating biodiversity impacts associated with solar and wind energy development. Now, I don't love that title because it is a deficit frame. It's not saying how do we create an energy industry that transforms the way we do development and enhances biodiversity in Australia. But, you know, there needs to be tangible steps on the way to the new vision. Two of the things that we're absolutely not doing in Queensland at the moment is citing project infrastructure to avoid naturally sensitive locations. In our legislation at the moment, the sensitive locations don't have anything to do with the environment. It's just like, is it near someone who might get upset about seeing a wind turbine, basically, right? And so we need to have a process and a legislated way that siting is done. And then something that I've alluded to is at the moment we're in the offset space in Queensland, where you can offset and have net loss, where you are allowing for ongoing clearing to happen. I truly believe, and there's a lot of people who know, that we can move into a net gain space where projects are enhancing biodiversity in the areas that they have. For example, if you had a cleared area or even a disrupted area with invasive species, you put a wind development on that disrupted area, and then you got rid of all of the invasive species on site, and you rehabilitated bits that had been previously cleared, all of those kind of things. Instead of, you don't have to clear and then rehabilitate. You can just go to places that are already cleared and rehabilitate them and put some wind turbines up, you know, so that is a net gain. We can have net gain here. And when we talk about siting right, it's already been done. This is in America. America did integrated biodiversity mapping for most of the central part of the lower 48. And that's where a lot of the wind is, but it is also a lot where a lot of biodiversity is. And the work that the Nature Conservancy have done in America, doing that mapping is informing both industry and community about where we should be putting renewable energy. I have a link to mapping there because, and I can show you guys that later, but we have done that for the Terrain NRM region now, but also we are working with Energy Charter, which is a great organisation. They're facilitating a collaborative workshop between renewable energy corporations and transmission companies and environment groups to figure out, to put this mapping together and put it up in the world so that we have that tool. And that's close to, something that we should have in the world soon. We also did a bunch of work in the conservation sector to have this conversation and talk about what a restorative energy looks like. And you can find this on the CAFNEC website. We are also now developing guidelines with industry that would reflect something similar to this, but we'll go through a much more thorough process between industry and the conservation sector in establishing what we're going to call something like leading practice guidelines, so that people, energy developers can understand what the expectations are around a restorative energy industry. We've put a bunch of things in there and I won't talk about them now because it will go on for a long time, but I really encourage you to jump on our website and have a look at them, and I'm happy to field questions about them. Many of you know that the Queensland government released the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan recently, which is a 10-year energy plan for Queensland. It's not as terrible as it could be. It's got a long way to go and a lot of detail to come, but I think it is really worth celebrating the things that are in there. So we know that we need a transition away from fossil fuel energy, because if we don't do that, we will fail. And it will be a very scary place and a very bad world to live in. There is an 80% renewable energy target by 2035 now in Queensland, and that is exciting. That plan also said that there will be a review of planning laws for energy development in Queensland, that all publicly owned coal-fired power stations will be shut down by 2035. And well, they'll be operating as clean energy hubs. We still need to figure out what that means. And they included Principle 5 in the Regional Partnerships Framework, which sits under the plan, which says positive coexistence preserves the local environment and promotes greater biodiversity. And I think that word greater is one that we really need to hold them to. And I think the other thing in there is the Energy Workers Charter and Job Security Guarantee was a very long fought thing for fossil fuel communities transitioning to renewable energy, and the commitment to making sure that all of those workers have jobs in the new industry. But there's bad as well. It does include a transmission, upgrades to the transmission between Cairns and Townsville. Everything surrounding that transmission line is World Heritage or Remnant Forest, and we have a lot of concerns about what upgrading that transmission line might mean for increased pressure on our protected areas and remnant forests. It doesn't close the coal export market, and in fact, the recent research shows that Queensland now is opening more new coal mines than any other country in the world by about 2 times. So we are not doing very well when it comes to coal closure, and it's quite scary what we're doing to the environment. There's not really any detail on the Queensland Renewable Energy Zones still to come. There's no clarity about where the money is going to come from for this plan. And I think the 2 really important things, to come back to what I was talking about before when we reimagine our energy industry, is there's no mention of distributed energy. This is talking very solely about, like in a very focused manner, about what they're calling the super grid. So it doesn't include plans for what does it mean for remote solutions to remote energy, particularly for Aboriginal communities in remote Australia, for regional communities that aren't close to the grid but still need power, for isolated communities by the land. So we have areas that are just surrounded by mountains that we don't want to build big transmission lines over. And there's also no mention of demand management. Now, I always like to refer back to water. When we had a water crisis in Southeast Queensland in the millennial drought, we didn't build 100 new dams. We did really good quality demand management that really lowered the amount of water that was demanded. Now, there is a difference between water and energy, but that doesn't mean that there isn't room for demand management on energy. And we really need to start talking about what energy do we need, and how are we reducing the amount of energy we're using. And that needs to happen for industry as well as society. And I think, the fact that that's entirely missing is a really big gap. And it is really talking to the ideas around what is the issue that we're trying to solve. And I think that at the moment, we're not really introducing enough complexity into the articulation of the problem that's trying to be solved through this. We have talked about the Chulumban wind farm a little bit before we started recording. So I've just put in here a bit around, I have only scratched the surface of like what we could be talking about tonight because we have limited time, and I definitely want to give you all time for questions. The Chulumban wind farm has been one of the big issues that has highlighted this problem for a lot of community, and something that a lot of people are concerned about. The public environment report was released on Monday. Groups like CAFNEC are working through it, and we'll be putting a submission up online for everyone to have a look at. So keep an eye out on that. We are hoping to very soon publish mapping and develop guidelines for energy development, and to develop new leading practice guidelines for the government-owned energy corporations and other energy groups. So there should be an enter between those, but it's been a very big week and I haven't quite got all the dot points there. Really encouraging people to participate in the public consultation on the energy plan and on the regional partnerships framework that comes under that, which will be happening. There's some surveys out now, but there will also be in-person consultation early next year. And I think the big thing is that we need to be keeping up pressure for the environment to be a central player in how this energy industry emerges, but also really talking about the complexity of this. Something that a lot of governments often like is for you to say, what is the issue in the simplest way, and what is the solution in the simplest way? And I think we really need to be very determinedly pushing back on that and saying, no, this is a wicked problem. It's a complex problem, and we need complex and nuanced solutions for it. And this isn't just about the announceables that you need to win the next election. And so I think we really need to be clear about this is not, this is a turning point for our society and our ability to live on an earth similar to what we have now. And the risk is that we could completely transition to a renewable energy industry and fail to solve the climate crisis or the biodiversity crisis if we don't do it in the right way. I've put 2 QR codes there for you guys to scan while you do question time. One of them is currently there is a survey for the Regional Energy Transformation Partnerships Framework. On that QR code, you can both see the framework and do the survey that the government is asking people to do. And the other thing is that CAFNEC has an active petition up at the moment to the planning minister to ensure that the planning review that they've announced is public. And includes the Code 23 and State Code 16, which are the codes that currently allow wind farms to be assessed without assessment under the Nature Conservation Act or any community consultation whatsoever. So like I said, there's a lot to this. There's a lot I haven't touched on, but I feel like I really wanted to just touch on those core points there, and it is an evolving situation. So thanks for your time. I am going to stop recording now. I got to stop sharing my screen, and then I will stop recording.